put forward this policy. It's a really sensible policy from a really, really irresponsible party. But I think it's a wake-up call for the mainstream parties, for the Conservatives, for the Labour, for the Lib Dems, to wise up that actually it's not politically toxic anymore to meddle with to tinker with welfare in this kind of way. Especially those with dependents, when you've got families with children who depend on benefits. Sorry, I'll let you.
Also, because in the budget, there's no cuts to welfare in the budget this time round. So
I appreciate there's no cuts, but there are serious changes to welfare.
Ed Mead, our economic correspondent, let's talk through the budget.
Let's talk through the budget. Let's do that.
What did George Osborne announced? What did he announce?
Well, first of all, let's just clarify. It was pretty much a non-budget. There was very little new substance to it.
Fuel duty.
There was the fuel duty. I passionately believe that they have never ever had the intention of raising fuel duty. It's just a nice little policy they leave there. Every year,
it's not really important.
We've taken this big move to freeze fuel duty to stop it from going up.
Yeah.
They've never ever planned to increase fuel duty. It's just a nice headline that they can feed to the press.
I suppose the big question is corporate tax has gone down again. But where are they getting this money from? The government, and that is from the government departments. It's not from health, education, is it?
It's interesting. A really good report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who are normally quite right wing, came out this week. Let's get that right.
Ed has had a few pints.
Not at all. It came out this week, and I'll read you this quote from it. An examination of the Office of Budget Responsibilities document revealed the Chancellor had achieved this unlikely feat. The feat was a reduction in borrowing, by ordering departments to underspend by 3.4 billion in the final 2 months of the year. Some of the spending, such as payments from Britain to the World Bank, turns out to be merely postponed into future years. And the OBR itself has warned that there's a risk that some of these delayed payments might be paid this year after all. Basically, what's happened is in the last 2 weeks before the budget announcement, George Osborne went into departments, insisted they cap their spending, they reduce their spending. It's a manipulation of the figures. If we look back to what he said in 2010, he pledged from now on we will have to fix the budget to fit the figures instead of fixing the figures to fit the budget.
Yeah.
What we see now is a complete contradiction of that pledge to the British public.
Dominic, do you agree with what Ed has just said?
With pushing the payments to the World Bank into the next financial year?
Yes.
Well, that's...
It's not sustainable. I think that's what we need to remember. This whole system is not sustainable. The idea of sustainability is that the next government, if Labour were to win the next election, they could adopt exactly the same policies and we would still continue on the same course. By postponing payments into future years, it's irresponsible. I would really like the Lib Dems to play a slightly harder hand in negotiations, particularly with regard to education. The Chancellor was very misleading actually this week when he said that the education budget has been protected only up to the age of 16, which is the cheapest education to provide. It's the 16 to 19 secondary education, the sixth form education, which is the most costly to provide. And they've adjusted the funding because Michael Gove, one of my least favourite politicians incidentally, has had quite a firm hand in these educational reforms, which he's so proud of. And these reforms mean that now schools are going to be paid per pupil and not dependent on the courses. So you've got... the schools will receive no extra money for providing more expensive courses. Who was it this week? It was the Association of School and College Leaders that have warned that sixth forms with less than 200 students, it's going to be unviable to provide these. So we're going to see a closure of lots of smaller sixth forms. We're going to see pupils travelling miles to the schools which provide the courses they want. Quite frankly, I think the educational reforms being pushed through by this government are reckless, they're irresponsible, and they take us back to a much darker time in British history.
Extremely worrying to have a Liberal Democrat, the Lib Dems in the government, in the coalition, so to speak, and not having a very big voice when it comes to these very radical education reforms.
Well, thanks to the Liberal Democrats, there's now 1 million apprenticeships for young people. So people who would leave school at 16, more chance of getting an apprenticeship. I think it's the highest ever record. The reforms of education, I'm not fully knowledgeable on the sixth form changes, but
if we talk, perhaps we should talk about academies, perhaps O levels coming back. I know they've gone back on that, but I mean,
that's David Laws stepping in. That's a Lib Dem influence actually in government. Stopping Michael Gove doing that. Bringing back in O levels.
But has the Liberal have the Liberal Democrats really do they have a cohesive policy when it comes to education at all, especially with pressure coming from their backtrack on tuition fees going into the government? Do you think that the electorate can have faith with the Lib Dems over education, over the economy? I'd say that the Lib Dems are quite strong. Their tax reform, raising the tax band from £6,000 to £10,000 a year.
Yeah.
That is undoubtedly.
Well, that was on the front page of our manifesto, and that was the first line of a manifesto. And all 4 of our main policies in the manifesto have all been implemented in full in this government. All 4 of them. I mean, electoral reform was a bit because it wasn't implemented. We had a referendum on AEV, but we still did that. So, was on the broken promises.
A miserable little compromise, I think, was the word used, wasn't it?
Well, he's talking about Nick Clegg said that about Gordon Brown. What he meant was, in that context, was that Gordon Brown put that as a Labour manifesto pledge so that they could try and make a last-ditch attempt to form a coalition of the Lib Dems. But then Ed Balls and the Miliband stopped that.
I mean,
could I just quickly put in a point about the academies and free schools, which we've talked a little bit about. There have been 9 free schools set up so far, I think, and Ofsted have recently inspected all 9 of them. 3 of them, so 33% of these new free schools, have been deemed unsatisfactory. Okay, well, there's no such thing as satisfactory, so it's a need for improve, I think is the new phrase. So 33% of these new schools, Michael Gove's flagship policy, have basically been deemed to be unfit to continue. Now, the government is planning on racing ahead with this free schools policy without any kind of evidence that it works in the UK. They've looked at models in Sweden, they've looked at models around the world, and they've seen it works quite well elsewhere. But I really don't believe that Michael Gove is the right man in the right job. His experiences in journalism.
Well, that you've made abundantly clear on this show.
I will continue to make it abundantly clear week after week.
To move on,
not a fan of Michael Gove either.
Well, that's we're agreed there that Michael Gove is a hate figure here at URF and on Paul's Politics. To move on to something similar. 31% of people would like to actually see a Liberal Democrat government.
A majority.
According
early statistics.
According to a poll.
Liberal Democrats.
Head of the polls now.
39% would select a Labour majority. 30%, a third, would Tory majority. 18% a Labour Lib Dem coalition, and 13% a Tory Lib Dem coalition. Dominic, you mentioned before the show you wouldn't, or at least you've mentioned recently that a Labour Liberal Democrat coalition wouldn't be very, in your opinion, it wouldn't be to your liking, would it?
Well, it's not really to my liking, but basically, like, whoever wins the general election, like a lot of Lib Dems are not fans of the Tories, and but they did get the most votes and seats in the general election, so they had the sort of right to enter coalition negotiations. And if Labour would get the most seats and votes in the next general election, then they're entitled to do that.
But there'll be no pact before the election.
No pact, because Lib Dems is a completely different party to all the others.
You wouldn't say that the Liberal Democrats are more similar to Labour than they are to the Tories?
No? Depends what section of the Lib Dems you ask. No.
On the whole.
I just think I personally I don't I sort of ban the Tories and Labour into the same bit. I don't know.
You'd say the Liberal Democrats are completely different, and you'd say Labour and Conservative are more similar to the Liberal Democrat. And
leading up to the financial crisis, for instance, leading up to the financial crisis, George Osborne's always saying, "Oh, Labour borrowed too much," blah blah blah. Then you actually look further into that, and you see that like Conservatives would have followed the same policies going up to the financial crisis. So the exact crisis would happen with the Conservatives. So I think
that is.
If I could quickly just butt in there, George Osborne and David Cameron are very quick to. They're very quick to blame Gordon Brown and actually Tony Blair for the mess that we're in now, for their reckless spending. I think it's the phrase they keep using. Exactly, it's all of this, and they quite often point to the lack of regulation on the financial sector as a reason. If we look back to early 2008, David Cameron made quite a famous speech where he slammed Gordon Brown as the great regulator that was constricting our financial industry. Now you can look that up on YouTube. Look up on
Independent Bank of England.
Well,
how ironic.
He's sort of. David Cameron was calling for less regulation, not more, in his years in opposition.
Interesting.
So for him now to turn round and for Gordon Brown to continuously, not Gordon Brown, sorry, for George Osborne to continuously blame Labour for the mess that we're in. It's his fourth budget. It's time for the Conservatives and the Lib Dems to take some responsibility. They've had the time. They're not getting the results. They need to change course.
Well, like is obviously the Eurozone crisis, and the global economy is significantly is very weak. So most of about half exports go to the Eurozone, and that is like Cyprus and Greece.
But Cyprus make up a very, very small percentage.
But a lot of
exports. I think it's less than a percentage, less than 1%.
Like a domino effect. It doesn't like that would quite easily spread to other countries in the Eurozone or in the EU. But when it comes to like the growth, I mean, the Dems obviously haven't got a majority. We can't do everything we want. We want to increase capital spending, and in this budget, we've increased capital spending by £3 billion, which is precisely
something I think last week we were all calling for unanimously, an increase in capital spending.
Yeah, I would personally want to go a lot further in that.
I think,
and I'm not so focused on cutting the deficit. I'm more focused on growth. But that's like Lib Dems
and it was Nick
Lib
Clegg.
Dems are different to Conservatives.
It was Nick Clegg who said it was the one regret of the coalition was the fact that they did not invest.
Yeah,
in
but the thing is, because Labour, the previous Labour government, they cut capital spending by, well, they wanted Alistair Darling in the 2010 budget wanted to cut capital spending by a third, and Nick Clegg said the mistake was that this government continued that policy. It should have reversed that policy. And that's essentially what we're doing now. But the thing is that because we're in a tight constraint, and it's Conservatives in government and don't want to borrow any more money or to increase capital spending.
Well, interesting. Just to butt in there.
Again,
borrowing is actually rising. Public sector debt is actually going to rise as a percentage of GDP. It's 75.9% this year. By 2015, this would have risen quite dramatically to 85.6%. Now that's miles away from the initial pledge by George Osborne to bring down the deficit, to bring down.
It is miles away.
Public sector debt.
There has been some external forces.
Well,
that have
if external forces are the failure of austerity to cause growth, then yes.
Well, austerity hasn't caused growth, but it hasn't. I don't think austerity has caused the recession. Like as Vince Cable,
it's definitely continued.
As Vince Cable said in his recent New Statesman article, was that he said that that the automatic stabilizers in the economy, like for instance, the Eurozone crisis, the government is borrowing more in response to the lowering demand. So the deficit's not going down because of because it's automatic stabilizers are coming into effect to offset.
But shouldn't they foreseen this? Like they knew there was going to be a euro crisis. That's been obvious ever since the financial crisis first hit. The government should have been prepared for this. There's alleged ignorance that George Osborne keeps trying to play. It's this card he keeps putting down. The euro crisis. The euro crisis. They knew the euro crisis was going to happen. We're deep into the euro crisis now. It's been ongoing
obviously,
for
like
years.
For instance,
where are the policies
from a Lib Dem perspective? There's a lot more the government can do. For instance, Lib Dems and myself are very in favour of a British business bank, increasing bank lending, increasing. That's the problem. That's the crisis. The credit crunch. Banks are not lending to businesses, and this is a problem which has long been before.
About reforming the banks,
and the Conservatives do not want to do this.
It's only the Labour Party who can join you with that.
Actually, Alistair Darling in the last general election was against splitting the bank. Was against.
But Ed Miliband has mentioned that splitting.
Oh, because he's just changed Labour policy the whole way around. But anyway,
sorry, that's his job in opposition to gradually adjust different policies.
He tends to be copying Lib Dem policies with the mansion tax and raising the tax threshold.
I think the Labour Party perhaps have a higher chance of pushing these policies through.
Actually, we raised the tax threshold and mansion tax. Well, if it's a Lib Dem Labour coalition, that could happen. But it's interesting in the coalition negotiations in 2010 between Labour and the Lib Dems, when Lib Dems wanted to, see what could happen with Labour, Ed Balls and Ed Miliband, who were negotiating for Labour, said that policy of raising the tax threshold to £10,000, which is the equivalent of a £700 tax cut for lower middle income earners, Ed Miliband said that policy was not affordable, it's not going to happen, it's like a fantasy policy. And look what we did, we implemented it in full. And now he's copied it.
We can all agree that the Liberal Democrats hold far more economic credibility